Have you ever tried to make a grand, dramatic exit from three absurdly good-looking werewolf brothers while wearing mismatched socks and clutching a leftover burrito? If your answer is no, then buckle up, because your life has clearly been smoother than mine. My name is Aurora Williams, and in the past few weeks, I've gone from invisible pack drudge to the most talked about, most infuriatingly complicated she-wolf in the entire Moonstone pack. Why? Because I discovered that my so-called mortal enemies, Damian, Jaxon, and Leander Thorn, are my fated mates. As in, all three of them. I'd love to say that was the most shocking revelation I faced this month, but the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Turns out, these guys have secrets about my family's murder, and I have a weird mystical power in my blood that might just save us or doom us all. Any normal person would run screaming, and to be fair, I've tried. Trouble is, fate doesn't care if you're wearing those mismatched socks. It'll grab you by the collar and yank you right back into the chaos, especially when there's a mate bond involved. I grew up believing my parents had abandoned me. The pack elders said they'd run off in the middle of the night, leaving all their debts in the Moonstone pack's hands. Because of those debts, I was forced to work off what they owed by scrubbing floors, washing linens, and dodging insults from wolves who thought I was an easy target. For years, I was the resident nobody, the scrawny child with limp hair who scurried around the estate's halls trying not to be noticed. Later, I became the curvy nobody with too many freckles, still trying not to be noticed. The pack's estate is enormous, with labyrinthine hallways, creaking floors, and a draft that snakes under every door. The walls are made of old gray stone with swirling carvings no one bothers to read anymore. At first glance, it could pass for a charming old mansion, but trust me, once you're forced to dust every chandelier and replace every broken tile, the charm wears off. I was the caretaker of all those gloomy corners, toiling away in near silence. That made it easier for others to ignore my existence, and easier for me to overhear hushed conversations I was never meant to hear. For the longest time, the highlight of my day was seeing the sun rise over the east courtyard. I'd slip out before dawn, aimlessly wandering past the dew-soaked lawn, telling myself that one day I'd be free. My 19th birthday was the date I circled in my mind, a promise I clung to whenever the chores got too grueling or the scornful whispers behind my back cut too deep. When I turned 19, I could leave the pack with no legal repercussions. That was my plan: run far away, find a place where no one knew my name, and maybe open a tiny coffee shop or a second-hand bookstore. Anything that didn't involve the Moonstone pack. But life doesn't bother asking for permission. 1 week before my birthday, I was on my knees, painstakingly scrubbing soot off the main fireplace in the grand dining hall. The pack was preparing for a gathering that night, a festival dedicated to the mating moon, an event that drew in visiting wolves from every corner of the region. Laughter and chatter spilled in from the corridors as excited guests and pack members hurried by. Despite the bustle, I was wholly focused on the stubborn patches of charcoal clinging to the hearth until I felt a chill race up my spine. Damian Thorn's voice cut through the air. "Aurora, how many times do I have to say it? The floors need to sparkle before the festival." I stiffened. He was the eldest of the Thorn triplets and the undisputed leader among them. Where the others threw around insults or cheap jibes, Damian had a way of hurting you with calm words and a quiet stare that made you feel smaller than dust motes. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that always fell neatly around his face. He didn't raise his voice often. He didn't need to. His slightest scowl was as good as a roar. I pretended not to notice how close he stood behind me. I'm almost done, I answered, trying to keep my tone level. Someone else snorted behind him, and I didn't need to turn to know it was Jaxon. He was the hot-headed brother, the one who took perverse pleasure in knocking stacks of plates out of my hands just to watch me scramble. I see at least 3 spots still covered in ash, he said, arms folded. You going blind or something? My shoulders tensed. My vision's fine, I said through clenched teeth. Leander, the quiet observer, stayed behind them, leaning against the wall. He was the type who said very little but missed absolutely nothing. Whenever Jaxon or Damian started on me, Leander would watch with this eerie calm, as if he were dissecting my every twitch. He hardly ever threw out direct insults, but somehow his silence made me feel just as vulnerable. He'd tilt his head and let a slight smirk curl across his lips, as though filing away each reaction for later. Damian's tone turned cold. The festival starts at dusk. You will not be attending, obviously. But I want everything perfect. Don't embarrass us. With that, he walked away. Jaxon stalked after him, shooting me one last glare for good measure. Leander trailed behind, giving me a curious glance before disappearing around the corner. I sank back on my heels, heart pounding and bitterness pulsing through my veins. They were so arrogant. They lorded over the pack as if they alone were responsible for its every success. Worst of all, the rest of the Moonstone Wolves ate it up like they were truly the next best thing since sliced bread. My grip on the scrub brush tightened. One week, I reminded myself, pushing aside the anger. 7 days and I'd be long gone. I'd find a city where no one had even heard of the Thorn triplets. That vow carried me through the rest of the day, although I made sure to keep my eyes lowered whenever one of them strolled by with that infuriating confidence. That night, everything changed. I was in the scullery, stacking clean dishes, when a peculiar sensation washed over me. An unmistakable tension crackled in the air, as though a thunderstorm was building inside the estate's very walls. My wolf, normally quiet and docile, sprang awake in the back of my mind. She sniffed at the air, excited, anxious, and so very alive in a way I'd never felt before. I almost dropped the plates in my hands. Something enormous was about to happen, and it had everything to do with me. Ignoring my better judgment, I slipped out of the scullery and followed the dull roar of music and laughter. I ended up at the edge of the courtyard, where hundreds of paper lanterns bobbed overhead. Wolves danced around blazing bonfires, couples shared drinks, and the entire night hummed with a primal energy. This was the Mating Moon Festival in full swing, the one night each year when unclaimed wolves hoped to find their fated partners. I'd always dismissed the idea of a mate bond. I never thought the moon goddess cared about me, an omega who never truly shifted. Yet as I stood there, inhaling the scent of spiced meats and sweet wines, my wolf let out a startled whimper. I smelled something else, the crisp, earthy scent of pine and firewood, tinged with a tantalizing spice that made my pulse hammer. I searched the crowd, feeling like my senses had multiplied tenfold. Then I saw them. Damian, Jaxon, and Leander stood by the main bonfire, expressions grim, commanding, and impossible to ignore. My entire body went hot. The noise around me died, replaced by the rush of blood in my ears. I had an overwhelming urge to walk straight toward them, but that made no sense. They were my tormentors, my nightmare, the reason I'd counted down the days to leave. Damian's gaze flicked over the crowd and landed on me. His lips parted, and for an instant, confusion played across his face. Jaxon locked eyes with me next, his usual sneer fading into shock. Leander, that perpetual observer, simply stared, but there was no denying the flicker of alarm in his dark eyes. Suddenly, it slammed into me like a physical blow. The mate bond. The world spun out from under my feet. This unstoppable force seemed to twine around my heart, hooking me to them. All three of them. It was so intense I had to fight the urge to collapse on the spot. The triplets must have felt it too, because their confident facades fractured. Jaxon's nostrils flared. Damian's mouth set in a hard line. Leander looked almost pained, his usual detachment nowhere to be found. I staggered away. My wolf begged me to turn back, to claim them, to rush into their arms, or, well, at least stand in front of them and let them claim me. But the rest of me recoiled in horror. No, this was some cosmic joke. After years of torment, these three alphas were my mates? I almost laughed at the sheer absurdity. Then I did the only sensible thing my mind could conjure. I bolted. I tore across the courtyard, weaving between dancers and spinning lanterns. Wolves shouted as I nearly knocked them over in my mad dash. The pounding of my pulse roared in my ears, but beneath that I heard a much more terrifying sound, the heavy footfalls of alpha werewolves in pursuit. They were faster, stronger, but I was small, agile, and fueled by panic. The festival lights and music blurred around me. I threw myself around a corner, wedging through a narrow passage near the old greenhouse, hoping to lose them. The greenhouse was locked after dark, so it offered no quick escape, but I could at least catch my breath. Then a hand wrapped around my wrist. I yelped, twisting around to shove whoever it was, but found myself staring at Leander. He flinched at my harsh recoil. "Calm down," he said, voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "We just want to talk." Damian and Jaxon arrived, panting slightly, though neither looked winded enough to suggest they'd run far. Alphas had near infinite stamina, a fact that was extremely unfair at this moment. My wolf practically screamed inside me, urging me to melt into their presence. I hated that I felt any pull at all. "This is insane," I whispered. "Whatever this is, it's a mistake." Jaxon ran a hand through his hair, looking almost rattled. "The bond's never a mistake," he managed. "The moon goddess." "Don't even start," I snapped, cutting him off. "I'm not a toy the goddess threw in your lap for a good laugh. There has to be another explanation." Damian's gaze seared into mine, a storm brewing behind those gray eyes. "We can't talk here." I tried to yank my wrist free from Leander's hold, but he didn't budge. He wasn't hurting me, but he was unmovable. The mate bond thrummed between us, making my stomach flutter despite everything. I felt furious with myself for reacting to him like this. My mind whirled. I remembered the rumors of a moon priestess who lived at the edge of the forest. People said she could interpret the goddess's will and sometimes bend it. If there was a chance, any chance, she had a way to break the bond. I had to find her. The triplets were dangerously close, and my nerves were fraying. Finally, Leander's grip loosened just enough for me to jerk away and sprint off once more. My legs burned, but I didn't care. I couldn't face the humiliation of seeing how triumphant they might look if I truly belonged to them. This time, they didn't catch me before I cleared the festival grounds. No guards stood at the outer gate. The pack was too busy celebrating. I ducked into the forest, letting the towering pines swallow me up, trusting that the triplets wouldn't want to cause a bigger scene. I could only imagine the questions that would arise if the entire pack found out the lowly servant girl was fated to their revered alphas. The moon priestess's temple loomed through the darkness, an ancient structure of smooth, dark stone. Twisting runes spiraled around the crumbling archway. I felt a prickle of energy the moment I stepped inside, like crossing an invisible threshold. Incense drifted, thick and sweet, making me dizzy. I followed the faint glow of candlelight until I found her, a slight figure with silver-white hair, draped in flowing robes. Her voice brushed the air with uncanny stillness. "You seek freedom from the bond," she said before I could utter a word. It wasn't a question. My heart thumped. I took a shaky breath and nodded. She guided me deeper into the temple, stopping at a stone altar that looked as old as the hills. Her violet eyes pinned me with an eerie calm. "You wish to break what the moon goddess has woven. There is a way, but it carries a heavy price." I breathed out, feeling a swirl of desperation. "I'm prepared to pay," I whispered. "Just tell me how." She explained that the mate bond is a sacred tether, nearly impossible to destroy. But there was a loophole, one that required a sheer force of will most wolves couldn't muster. If I resisted the bond for 8 consecutive full moons, refused every impulse, every desire, and never consummated or accepted the connection, then the bond would be severed permanently. It would be as if we were never mates at all. I felt my wolf recoil, howling in protest at the idea. Resisting for even 1 moon would be torture, and now I needed 8? Still, I had no other option. A life tethered to the thorn triplets sounded worse than any pain. I told the priestess I would do it. She touched my forehead with a single finger, whispering words in the old tongue. A cold rush shot through my veins, making me gasp. My wolf howled in discomfort, but the spell had been cast. When the priestess stepped back, she looked older than before, her face lined with sadness. "The bond will fight back. You will face agony beyond imagining. But if you succeed, you will be free." That was all I needed to hear. I thanked her, though the word felt oddly insufficient, then hurried out into the night. My body already throbbed, as though the bond recognized the threat. Before I could make it halfway back to the pack estate, I sensed a trio of powerful auras closing in. The Thorn brothers. They practically radiated annoyance and confusion as they appeared in front of me, blocking my path with predatory ease. Damian's voice was a low growl. "You went to the priestess." I stared at him, heart pounding. "And if I did?" Jaxon cursed under his breath. "That was a stupid risk. Breaking the bond can kill you." "You suddenly care about me now?" I said, bitterness overflowing. "That's rich." Leander's gaze flickered with something like concern. "We'll find a way to fix this, Aurora. You don't realize what you've done." I inhaled, summoning all the steel in my spine. "Watch me succeed." They looked at me then, truly looked, and seemed to realize I meant every word. For the first time, I saw something crack in Damian's usual stone-cold expression. Fear. The knowledge that in 8 months, I might slip through their fingers forever. Back at the estate, they launched a coordinated campaign to break my resolve. Damian left a gorgeous midnight blue gown on my cot with a note that read, "Were this for dinner?" Jaxon started showing up at mealtimes with a tray piled high with my favorite foods, forcing me to either accept his generosity or starve. Leander worked behind the scenes, slipping me little envelopes with cryptic invitations. They hovered around me constantly, forcing me to feel their presence and, worse, the bond. My wolf grew restless, whining that I should at least give them a chance. One day, in the middle of scrubbing the corridor floors, I felt an unsettling chill. A voice, distant and echoing, whispered my name, Aurora. I whipped around, but saw no one. Then it came again, like a faint breeze against my ear. Unease roiled in my gut. I told myself it was exhaustion and stress playing tricks on me. Yet the next night, it happened again. And the next. Something was calling to me. A fresh wave of disappearances plagued the territory. Wolves went missing near the boundaries, their scents disappearing into thin air. Nobody could explain why. The pack grew tense. Training sessions were ramped up. Even the triplets seemed on edge, though they were reluctant to show it. Then, during one session, I blacked out mid-spar. When I came to, Jaxon was standing over me, shouting my name in panic while onlookers formed a circle around me. My vision had been flooded with a horrifying image, a battlefield drenched in blood, with monstrous wolves made of shadows tearing through our pack's warriors. I tasted ashen fear, then blinked, and it was gone. I tried to brush it off, but it left me shaken to my core. The bond was a distraction, yes, but there was something else stirring. My instincts told me these visions tied into the weird power simmering under my skin. The Moon Priestess's ritual must have awakened more than just the ability to sever the mate bond. Something old and formidable lurked inside me, and it had begun to show itself at the worst possible time. 3 weeks passed in this haze of partial illusions, creeping fear, and constant attempts by the triplets to wear me down. They cornered me with half apologies, lavish gifts, and startling moments of kindness that made my wolf yearn for them against my will. Worse, a tiny, traitorous part of me wondered if they could be different, if their cruelty had been a twisted product of their father's expectations. Maybe they regretted it. Maybe they wanted redemption. But I clung to the memory of how they'd treated me for years, how they'd laughed at my misery. The vow with the priestess was my lifeline. I would not break before 8 months were up. I'd endure the bond's torment to gain the ultimate prize, freedom. Everything imploded the day Garrick, the old beta who'd served the pack for ages, found me rearranging the dusty volumes in the library. I'd been lost in thought, trying to ignore the creeping sense of dread that followed me. Garrick's presence surprised me. He usually kept to himself. "I can't keep this secret anymore," he said, voice trembling as he approached. "You deserve to know the truth." I braced myself, setting aside a book. "What truth?" He took a deep breath, exhaled. "Your parents didn't abandon you. They were murdered." My mind reeled, every muscle going rigid. "That's not what I was told." He nodded, sorrow written across his lined face. "Because the pack didn't want you to know. Argus Thorn, father of Damian, Jaxon, and Leander, discovered your parents' lineage. He found out there was something special in their bloodline, something that made him feel threatened. So he ordered them killed. You were supposed to die too, but someone spared you in the chaos. By the time Argus realized you were alive, you'd escaped his men. Eventually, he tracked you back down and fabricated the story about debts, forcing you into servitude so he could keep a close eye on you." My world spun. The lines of old bookshelves wavered like illusions. I thought I might collapse from the weight of his words. Garrick's eyes misted. "I can't undo what's been done, but you deserve the truth. Your parents never abandoned you." Tremors started in my hands. The Thorn patriarch had murdered them, and I'd been forced to toil under his family for most of my life, humiliated and scorned. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. Rage flared like molten metal in my chest. When I exhaled, I felt the presence of that hidden power surge up, golden sparks dancing around my fingers. The force that erupted from me was terrifying. The entire library shook. Shelves toppled, sending ancient tomes crashing to the floor. Garrick stumbled back in shock, but the tremors didn't subside. I heard frantic shouting in the hall, and seconds later, 3 very familiar alphas burst into the room. They froze at the sight of me wreathed in flickers of golden light, the remains of my fury crackling in the air like wildfire. Damian's eyes flicked from the collapsed shelves to the aura around me. Aurora, what? I could barely look at them. Did you know? My voice sounded foreign, trembling with heartbreak and anger. Jaxon opened his mouth, then hesitated, revealing more guilt in that moment than any words could. Leander finally spoke, so quietly I almost missed it. We found out about it after Father died. That was confirmation enough. They'd known. They'd known all along that their father was responsible for my parents' deaths, and they hadn't told me. My own mate bond, twisted and inflicted on me by fate, was tethered to the bloodline that destroyed my family. The power surged inside me again, responding to my anguish. Books rattled on the floor, and cracks splintered across the walls. Get out, I demanded, tears scorching my face. Stay away from me. They tried to approach. Damian looked stricken. We wanted to protect you from the truth. Protect me? My laugh came out fractured. You tormented me for years. You let me believe I was just an unwanted nuisance. And now you claim you wanted to protect me? Leander took a cautious step forward, expression desperate. We made mistakes. We didn't know how to handle it, or how you'd react, or if it would put you in danger. Our father. I didn't let him finish. I'm done. I'm leaving, and if any of you try to stop me, I swear I'll tear this entire estate apart. For a moment, none of them spoke. The library was a battlefield of toppled shelves and swirling dust, illuminated by the last flickers of my unleashed power. I half expected them to force me to stay, but for once, they didn't. Maybe they were truly shocked by how viciously I could strike back. Maybe they finally realized that I wasn't their puppet anymore. I turned away, stumbling over fallen books as I fled. My heart felt like it was ripping itself in two, each ragged breath stoking the flames of betrayal and sorrow. I hated them for their silence, for their father's sins, and for every moment of torment. But I hated fate even more for tying me to them in the first place. Outside, the sky had darkened. Thunderheads gathered overhead, rumbling with ominous force. Rain began to fall, pelting my skin. I wandered through the courtyard, ignoring the startled glances of a few pack members who noticed the tears streaming down my cheeks and the faint glow around my hands. No one dared approach me. I was an Omega, but something had clearly changed. All I wanted was to vanish from the Moonstone Pack for good. That was the plan, right? Once I turned 19, I'd be free. Except I wasn't 19 yet, and my body burned with the agonizing weight of the mate bond, plus the fresh scalding knowledge that the Thorn family had stolen everything from me. There was no solace. Not in the pack. Not in the storm. Not even in myself. I made a silent promise. I would endure the next months, see the vow to the priestess through, and break this wretched bond. Then I would destroy every tie I had to the Thorn family and the Moonstone Pack. After all the secrets and pain, I didn't care if my departure left them in chaos. Let them crumble under the guilt and the consequences of Argus Thorn's actions. Let them choke on their regret. From behind me, I sensed the triplets lingering, even in the pouring rain, watching me walk away. They didn't call out or try to follow. In that moment, I thought that might be the one merciful thing they'd ever done. I reached the old servant quarters, my boots squelching against the muddy ground. I slipped inside, leaning against the door once it was shut, trying to catch my breath. My hands were still trembling, the golden glow fading slowly. I knew I should pack. But exhaustion overtook me. The emotional whirlwind of betrayal and heartbreak was too much, and my body was still adjusting to the surge of power. I sank onto the edge of the narrow cot that passed for my bed. Maybe in the morning, I'd figure out my next move. All that burned in my mind was a single, fervent prayer. Let these next months pass as quickly as possible. Once the bond was gone, I'd vanish into the sunrise, leaving these cursed halls, these cursed alphas, and every memory of them behind. Rain hammered on the tin roof, lightning flashing intermittently. Outside, I heard distant thunder and the clamor of the festival winding down. Inside my chest, I heard the ragged beat of my heart, each pulse a reminder that I was still alive, still furious, still longing for a freedom I could almost taste. I curled up on the lumpy mattress, eyes squeezed shut, tears mixing with the rainwater in my hair, determined not to let a single sob escape. Everything was wrong, but I clung to the promise of tomorrow. If I'd survived years under their thumbs, I could survive anything. A traitorous whisper of the mate bond tried to tell me I wasn't alone, that they were out there, just as torn, just as afraid. I blocked it out, holding tight to my anger like a shield. Hours later, I must have drifted into a fitful sleep because I dreamt of swirling shadows and monstrous howls. I dreamt of the triplets, their expressions haunted, reaching for me through the darkness. But every time they got close, the ground cracked open, and I fell deeper into the void, alone with my rage and sorrow. The storm raged all night, and when dawn arrived, the world outside was washed clean, but my inner turmoil felt more tangled than ever. All I knew for certain was that no matter how battered or confused I felt, I would never forgive the Moonstone Pack for its sins. If my parents were watching from wherever spirits go, I hoped they'd help me find the strength to sever the bond and reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. That was the last coherent thought that guided me as I opened the creaking door of the servant quarters, stepping out into a gray, rain-drenched day, ready to start forging a plan to leave. I was done being a ghost in their halls. One way or another, I'd make sure the Thorn brothers understood that my destiny was no longer tied to theirs. I just had no idea that destiny might have other plans. The next morning, Aurora woke before dawn and felt the cold air prickling her skin. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a pale gray. She tried to swallow the tight feeling in her throat as she surveyed the cramped, dusty servant quarters. Rage and heartbreak still pulsed behind her ribcage, but the numb exhaustion from last night had dulled the edges. She dried her face, scolding herself for any tears she might have shed while she slept. None of that would solve her problems. The only thing that mattered was leaving this place, or at least figuring out how to survive until her 19th birthday without imploding from the mate bond. She slipped outside. Mud squelched under her boots. She'd spent years navigating the estate's many nooks and hidden corners, so she knew exactly where to go to avoid running into the triplets this early. The silence was unnerving, though. Usually, the pack's territory was busy by sunrise, warriors out for training, groundskeepers handling chores, pups racing around squealing with morning energy. Now it seemed deserted. She heard faint snoring through an open window, which made her snort. Apparently half the pack had stayed up all night drinking and dancing at the festival. Good. That meant less chance of someone intercepting her. She reached the back gardens, where the hedges had grown wild from neglect. High walls surrounded this part of the estate, topped with decorative iron spikes. She pressed a hand to the mossy stone and wondered how quickly she could climb it. A ridiculous thought. She wasn't allowed to leave the territory for good until her 19th birthday. The pack law was clear on that, even for an Omega. Worse still, if she tried running away now and got caught, The triplets might lock her in a windowless room until she either caved to the bond or starved. That was the kind of show of force alphas were known for. It wasn't worth the risk. She turned away from the wall, every muscle tense, and caught a faint whiff of pine and fresh soap. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't just any random wolf. Only one man in the pack smelled like that, Damian. She glanced around, fighting the urge to duck behind a hedge. Too late. He stepped out from behind a broken marble fountain that had seen better days. Sunlight highlighted the dark waves of his hair, his serious gray eyes fixed on her. She froze, pulse hammering. He didn't snarl or demand she return to her chores. Instead, he stood in the wet grass, wearing a black sweater pushed to the elbows, his expression carefully neutral. She felt the mate bond hum between them, which made it that much harder to maintain her glare. He spoke in a near whisper, as if any loud noise might spook her. "I knew you'd come here first." He sighed, sliding his hands into his pockets. "You always pass through the gardens at sunrise. Even before all this mess." She bristled. She didn't like the idea that he'd been paying close attention to her habits. It made her feel exposed. She tried for a bitter retort, but the words snagged in her throat. The memory of his father's crime, his own complicity in keeping it a secret, still burned. She turned away to walk back toward the estate, but he moved faster, blocking her path with a gentle shift of his body. She clenched her fists. "Let me by." He met her gaze, and she felt the weight of his regret. "I'm sorry," he said, voice tight. "I know how worthless that must sound, given everything." She nearly laughed. She couldn't recall a single time Damian had ever apologized to her, not for the endless cleaning tasks, or the humiliations, or the times he'd stood by while Jaxon taunted her. Now he expected his one apology to fix the fact that his family had destroyed hers. She swallowed the acidic words that threatened to spill out. The bond still tugged at her heart, a maddening ache that made her wolf whimper in confusion. She steadied her voice. "You want forgiveness, but you don't understand what I've been through. I was robbed of my family, then forced to serve your pack as some nobody. And you've known for years that your father was behind it all." He moved closer, close enough that she felt his warmth. She held her breath, their bond vibrated like a tight string. He lowered his head, speaking quietly. "I never wanted you to suffer. I know that's hard to believe. But my father built this entire place on lies and blood. We didn't realize the full extent of it until after he was gone. You think we're proud of anything he did?" She felt that same rage flare, pushing back against the bond's siren call. "Then why not tell me the truth from the beginning?" His jaw clenched. "Because we were scared we'd lose you." He gave a hollow laugh. "Ironic, I know. We couldn't lose what we never really had, but we were selfish enough to try. And look where it got us." She sniffed, tears threatening to return. "It's too late." He bowed his head for a moment. "Maybe, but if you could give us a chance to make things right." She cut him off, voice shaking. "I'm giving you nothing. I've made my deal with the Moon Priestess, and I'm going to break this bond. After that, I'm gone." He flinched, and she realized how much those words must hurt an alpha's pride, especially one who was used to ruling every facet of the pack. She sensed the tension in his stance, as if he wanted to argue or command her to stay. Instead, he nodded stiffly, stepped aside, and let her walk away. She didn't look back, but she heard him exhale a ragged breath. The mate bond vibrated with sorrow that didn't feel entirely like her own. She slipped through the back door, returning to her cramped quarters. Her room was one of half a dozen converted storage closets. She sank onto the bed, face in her hands, trying to breathe. The conversation played over in her mind like a broken record, stirring up guilt and longing in equal measure. She shook it off. She wanted freedom more than anything else. A frantic knock sounded. She tensed, worried it was one of the other two triplets wanting to corner her. But when she cracked the door open, she found Mika, a junior pack warrior around her age, panting as if he'd run from the training grounds. He gasped, "Aurora, the alphas want you in the main hall." The High Council arrived. Something's happened. Her stomach dipped. The High Council? They usually only showed up for major disputes or dire emergencies. The last time they visited, Argus Thorn was still alive, surveying them with his calculating grin. She never forgot how intense their presence felt, regal yet terrifying. Why were they here now? She followed Mika, aware that any attempt to refuse would raise alarm. The pack's main hall was a cavernous space with cracked marble columns. Wolves stood in uneasy clusters. She spotted older, gray-haired council members dressed in ceremonial robes. A hush fell when Aurora entered. She tried not to cringe under so many stares. Jaxon stood near the front, arms folded. Leander was behind him, posture stiff. Damian lingered off to the side, a faint scowl etched on his face. Counselor Brenner, a tall, wiry man with pale hair, was speaking in a clipped tone. Aurora missed the first part of what he said, but caught enough to sense trouble. He turned, eyes narrowing on her. The missing wolves, these strange disappearances. You're certain no one has gleaned any clue? Leander's voice emerged from the circle, collected but cold. It's as we reported. There's no clear scent trail, no evidence of a struggle. They vanish without a trace. Counselor Brenner's lips pressed thin. We've received similar reports from other packs. It suggests an outside force. Perhaps rogue wolves, but if so, they're more organized than we've ever seen. Damian's gaze flicked to Aurora, then away again. We'll increase patrols at the borders. Counselor Brenner paused, then locked eyes with Aurora in an uncomfortable stare that made her want to shrink behind someone tall. We've been told you've shown unusual abilities of late. Is that correct? She swallowed, blood pounding. She hated being the center of attention, especially after half-destroying the library the day before. She managed a nod. A murmur passed through the onlookers. The counselor studied her, as if weighing how much of a threat or asset she might be. We suspect a new faction has arisen, one that manipulates shadow magic. Our sources say they may be targeting wolves who exhibit certain rare traits. You may be such a target. We advise caution. She stiffened, goosebumps prickling her skin. She didn't want to be special in any way. She just wanted out. I'll be careful, she muttered. One of the other council members, a stern woman with silver braids, added, if you sense anything, visions, echoes, the presence of dark energy, you must alert the alphas immediately. The future of every pack may hinge on eliminating this threat. Jackson's jaw tightened. We'll handle it. The weight behind his words was unmistakable. The High Council might be meddling in their affairs, but the triplets wouldn't let them overshadow their own authority. Counselor Brenner nodded, then turned briskly to greet other pack elders, effectively dismissing the rest of them. Aurora exhaled in relief. She tried to slip away, but Jaxon caught her arm, gently, shockingly enough, just as she was about to dart through the crowd. She glared at him, her heart slamming against her ribs. She couldn't help noticing the worried tension in his face, though. He usually had that cocky grin plastered on, the kind that made him look like he thrived on petty chaos. Now he just looked drained. He spoke in a hushed tone. You really need to be on guard. If these freaks are kidnapping wolves with unique powers, you're probably at the top of their list. She pulled free. I appreciate the warning. Now let go. He released her, raising his hands in surrender. Look, I know we can't fix the past in one day, but can you at least let us protect you if something happens? She cut him off with a humorless laugh. You and your brothers have done nothing but make my life miserable. Now, because a bunch of creeps might come for me, you suddenly want to be my personal bodyguards. He cracked a wry smile that had no real mirth. Might be easier if you'd stop trying to slip away from us. Too bad, she snapped and turned on her heel. The mate bond coiled in her chest, protesting the distance. She ignored the pang, ignoring that once again a tiny part of her wanted to stay and hear him out. She wandered through the halls, half eager to gather what little she had and run, half aware that leaving would paint a target on her back. If these shadow wolves were real, she couldn't handle them alone. Yet she refused to let the triplets lock her in some gilded cage. She ended up in an abandoned corridor near the old beta's office, her head spinning. She considered pushing open Garrick's door, but the memory of his confession still rattled her. She needed solace. In her confusion, she drifted to the library. The place was still wrecked from her power surge, and the staff had barely started cleaning it up. Piles of books lay scattered on the broken shelves. She crouched, running a finger over a battered spine. Reading used to be her escape, a window into worlds where orphans found families that truly loved them, or where they discovered they were wizards or knights. She envied those fictional heroes so much it hurt. A faint cough alerted her. Leander stood by the doorway, uncharacteristically hesitant. His hair was pulled back, making his sharp features more pronounced. She clenched her jaw, preparing for another unwelcome confrontation. But when he stepped forward, his eyes flicked to the fallen tomes. "Do you need help?" he asked softly. She suppressed a mirthless laugh. "No, I can manage a few dusty books on my own." He nodded, but didn't leave. There was an uncomfortable silence, filled only by the soft echo of water dripping from a damaged roof tile into a puddle. She waited for him to pounce with some manipulative suggestion, but he simply took a stack of books from a collapsed shelf, placed them carefully on a table, and returned for another. She frowned, confused by his behavior. She didn't want to talk, but the tension in the air was unbearable. Eventually, she muttered, "What do you want, Leander?" He brushed dust off his shirt. "Nothing. He hesitated, chewing on the corner of his lip as if deciding how honest to be. "I'm sorry. We were ignorant about how bad everything was for you. There's no excuse." She couldn't stop the resentment from boiling up again. "You watched me pick up shards of porcelain when Jaxon shattered dishes on purpose. You gave out commands that made my days a living hell. So don't stand there and pretend you didn't know." His expression tightened. "I know. I've replayed some of those moments in my mind. If we could go back." "We can't," she snapped. Her throat felt tight. "But at least now I know the truth. And I'm leaving as soon as I can." He grimaced, eyes flicking to the broken shelves. "I'm not asking you to forget or to sweep anything under the rug. But the next few months will be dangerous with these disappearances. We don't know how far this new threat goes." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Then I'll die on my own terms, far from here if I have to." He set down the last book and wiped his hands, voice subdued. Not if we can help it. She had no response. A swirl of conflicting emotions tore through her. Before the mate bond, these men were her tormentors, but now it felt like an unseen rope bound them together. It was maddening. The tension was so thick it practically roared. She half expected him to do something alpha-like, pin her against the shelves or bare his teeth. Instead, he stepped back, gave a short nod, and walked out. She sank onto a toppled stool, pressing her palms to her eyes. They were all apologizing, all showing new colors now that the truth was out. Part of her hated them more for it, as if they were trying to rebrand themselves as heroes. Another part couldn't help but sense their genuine regret. Too bad regret didn't erase the years of pain. She spent the rest of the day avoiding everyone, skipping lunch to hole up in her tiny room. Evening fell, and the pack's main kitchens bustled with staff preparing food for the High Council. Rumors flew about rising tensions in neighboring territories, about entire families disappearing, about sightings of shadowy figures near the edges of farmland. The pack was on high alert. Aurora wasn't sure if that made her feel safer or more trapped. She crawled into bed, her body aching with bone-deep fatigue. The moment she drifted off, the visions slammed into her. This time, she stood in the courtyard, flames swirling around a towering silhouette with glowing red eyes. The creature beckoned to her, chanting something in a guttural language. She saw wolves with twisted forms, consumed by darkness. A thunderous voice echoed, "Moonborn, come to us." Her heart pounded. She tried to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there. Then a brilliant golden light enveloped her, and she glimpsed the triplets lunging into battle by her side. The vision burned white-hot and vanished. She jolted awake, tangling in her sheets. Her chest heaved, sweat drenching her hairline. She pressed a hand to her racing heart, feeling the echo of that monstrous presence. She'd never been so grateful to see plain old darkness. She forced her breathing to slow. The images were so vivid they felt real. She wanted to dismiss them as nightmares, but the line between dream and prophecy was blurring. The old stories said certain bloodlines, especially ones touched by strong magic, could catch glimpses of possible futures. Was that what she was now, some kind of prophet for doom? Morning arrived with damp gloom and no answers. The estate buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Wolves paced the corridors, exchanging worried glances. A handful of warriors had gone on a border patrol after midnight and found more signs of unnatural activity, footprints that abruptly vanished, scorch marks in the grass, a lingering sense of dread. Aurora found it ironic that all of this overshadowed her own personal crisis. Maybe that was a good thing. If the pack was focused on survival, they had less time to meddle with her. By midday, she steeled herself for a trip to the orchard, a place rarely frequented by the alphas. She had to gather a basket of apples for the staff, and it was better than staying cooped up in the estate. She trudged along the dirt path, ignoring the goose flesh on her arms. The orchard was quiet, with neat rows of trees brimming with red and green fruit. She took a deep breath, the sweet scent of ripening apples mingling with damp earth. She almost felt peaceful for once. She reached for a low branch, plucking apples one by one, trying not to think about the mate bond or about how the triplets were probably organizing new patrols to deal with the threat. The orchard wasn't large, but the trees provided decent cover from prying eyes. She moved deeper between them, humming a little to calm herself. Branches snapped behind her. She tensed, instincts flaring. She spun, half expecting a random wolf to greet her, or maybe a caretaker scolding her for leaving fruit on the ground. Instead, she met a pair of cold, gleaming eyes, and the apple in her hand slipped to the grass. It wasn't a member of the pack. The man wore dark clothes, his hair long and tangled, his fingernails more like claws. Something off about his scent prickled at her senses, a mix of rot and old blood. His lips curled into a twisted grin, revealing sharpened canines. She backed away, heart hammering. "Who are you?" He didn't answer, only advanced with a deadly grace. She scanned the area for an escape route, but he was between her and the open path. She could scream, though the orchard was far from the estate. "Would anyone hear?" The man lunged. She reacted on instinct, letting the stirring power inside her surge up. A burst of golden light crackled across her skin, making him recoil. She twisted away, ignoring the slash of his claws that grazed her shoulder. Pain lanced through her, hot and sharp, but adrenaline kept her moving. He snarled something in a strange language, his eyes glowing red for an instant. Her pulse spiked with terror. Those eyes, she recognized them from her nightmares. She realized he wasn't a normal rogue. Shadow magic clung to him, swirling at the edges of his form like black smoke. Her wolf bristled, fear colliding with fury. She released another pulse of energy. It rippled through the air, slamming him against a tree. Apples fell in a cascade. He hissed, clearly disoriented, but not defeated. Shadows danced around his limbs, pushing him back onto his feet. She had no training in how to wield magic. She had no idea how many blasts like that she could summon before she collapsed. Still, she couldn't let him close the distance again. His mouth stretched into a wide grin, revealing an unnaturally forked tongue. He lunged again, faster this time, weaving through the orchard in a blur. She flinched, raising her arms, trying to draw upon the power. Nothing answered. Her desperation rose. She sensed him behind her, felt the brush of cold fingers. Then she heard a roar of anger, and something massive tackled him away from her. Jaxon's wolf pinned the attacker, fangs bared. In a flash, Jaxon shifted back to human form, driving a fist into the man's jaw. Leander darted in, yanking Aurora aside. She gasped, clutching her throbbing shoulder. A streak of warmth trickled down her arm. Damian rushed up from behind, eyes blazing silver. The attacker released an ear-splitting screech, then sank into the swirling black smoke, vanishing before any of them could land a finishing blow. A foul odor lingered, but he was gone. Jaxon cursed, chest heaving. He shot Aurora a wild glance. "You okay?" His gaze locked on the blood staining her shirt. She trembled, pressing a hand to the shallow wound. I think so." Damian and Leander converged on her, concern etched into their faces. The mate bond pulsed in relief that made her dizzy. She clung to the trunk of the nearest tree to stay upright. Fear and lingering adrenaline threatened to override her rational thoughts. She found herself hating how grateful she felt to see them. Damian's voice dropped to a protective growl. "Let me see." He tried to examine her shoulder. She flinched away by reflex, but he carefully brushed her hair aside to check the wound. It wasn't deep, but it stung like fire. She saw his jaw tighten. "We need to get you to the healer." She started to protest, but a wave of nausea hit. Shadows seemed to pulse at the edges of her vision. She heard Jaxon mutter a curse under his breath. Leander gently hoisted her up into his arms, ignoring her weak struggles. The orchard spun. She sensed their wolves raging inside them, fury at the intruder who'd left her bloodied. They rushed her to the estate infirmary, which was usually just a modest room with basic supplies. The pack's healer, a plump woman named Greta, fussed and scolded Aurora for leaving the safety of the main grounds alone. Aurora bit her lip, letting Greta's herbal ointment sting her raw flesh. The triplets hovered near the doorway like overprotective guard dogs. Greta gave them a few choice words about letting Aurora out of their sight if there were dangers lurking about. They bristled but said nothing. After the bandage was applied, Greta left them alone. Aurora lay back on a rough cot, trying to ignore the ache in her shoulder. The triplets crowded around, evidently refusing to leave until they were certain she was stable. Her pulse jumped in that maddening way whenever they were near, but she was too exhausted to argue. Jaxon crouched by her side, gaze darting over her. "You look pale. Does it hurt a lot?" She forced a grimace that might pass for a smile. "I'll live." She was startled to realize she believed it. If that shadow man had wanted to kill her, he would have. But maybe he had other plans: kidnap her, harness her powers. A shudder twisted her stomach. "You came just in time." His brow furrowed. "We sensed your power flare. We'd been tracking something near the orchard. Didn't expect you to be there alone." Leander leaned against the wall, hands sliding into his pockets. "We have to assume he was part of the force abducting wolves. He clearly wanted you. Do you understand how serious this is?" She exhaled shakily. "I'm starting to." She paused, eyeing Damian. He had said almost nothing, tension pouring off him in waves. "Thank you for helping me." He nodded, though his expression remained grave. "Don't thank us. We should have kept you safe from the start." Silence fell, heavy with all that remained unsaid. Aurora's heartbeat thumped too loud in her own ears. A reluctant warmth spread through her chest, clashing with her residual anger. She felt the bond swirl, tangling with the helpless gratitude that they'd shown up in time. She hated feeling so confused, so torn. Greta returned with tea, ordering Aurora to drink it and rest. The triplets gave in to her scolding, stepping back to let Aurora have space. Before they left, Jaxon lingered in the doorway. "Don't run off again," he said, voice low. "We can't." He stopped, swallowed, then tried again. "We can't bear losing you." She had no answer. He left, letting the door thud shut behind him. She stared at the battered wooden panels, her mind spinning over the words that nearly broke her resolve. She drifted into a restless sleep haunted by shadowy figures and half-formed pleas from the triplets. Every time, her mind circled back to the same question: was it possible to let go of her rage and trust them, even a little, while still clinging to the plan of severing the bond? For the next several days, the triplets practically forced a protective detail on her. If she left her quarters to do so much as fetch a glass of water, one of them, or a warrior from their closest ranks, trailed after her. It was claustrophobic and maddening, like living in a fishbowl. But she couldn't deny feeling marginally safer, even if she hated that it was their presence making her feel that way. Patrols around the territory tripled. Tension threaded through the pack, overshadowing usual routines. The council members still lingered, investigating any sign of shadowy rogues. More than once, Aurora woke in the night to the distant howling of search parties, an unsettling reminder that the threat was real and far from resolved. Her attempts to resist the bond grew harder by the day. She found herself noticing small details about each brother: Damian's steady composure when dealing with anxious pack members, Jaxon's surprising sense of humor that slipped out when he didn't realize she was listening. Leander's knack for quietly helping a warrior adjust an injury wrap. These were traits she'd never bothered to look for when she only saw them as bullies. It shook her convictions, especially when her wolf practically purred at any sign of goodness in them. The 8th day after her orchard attack, she tried to slip away for a quiet moment by the koi pond behind the estate. She rarely went there because the water was too murky and the fish were probably in need of better feeding, but it was secluded enough that she might finally be alone. She managed 5 blissful minutes, letting the cool breeze skim across her face until footsteps alerted her that she wasn't unobserved. Sure enough, Jaxon appeared from behind a scraggly bush. She groaned. "You guys really need a new hobby." He at least had the decency to look sheepish. "I'm not stalking you, I promise. I was checking the perimeter. The orchard's that way, and I figured you might. Never mind." He cleared his throat. "How's the shoulder?" She shrugged. "I can use it fine, thanks to Greta's herbs." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. I brought these." He held out a small pouch. "They're roasted almonds. I noticed you liked them, so I thought." He trailed off, looking vaguely mortified at the domestic gesture. Her stomach, traitorously, did a little flip. She reminded herself that a handful of almonds didn't erase years of torment. "Thanks," she said stiffly, taking the pouch, though she didn't open it. She tried to ignore her wolf practically wagging its tail in excitement. He rocked on his heels, scanning the overgrown pond. "I used to fish here when I was a kid. Tried to catch koi with my bare hands. Father would yell if he caught me." He gave a mirthless grin. Funny how I thought that was the worst he could do. She stared at him, startled by the confession. Jaxon typically showed bravado, not vulnerability. It was as if pieces of them were unraveling before her eyes. She pressed her lips together, unsure how to respond. She didn't want to rehash Argus Thorn's crimes. She just wanted to be left alone. But he looked so lost. He turned to her with a soft exhale. "Look, I know this is awkward, and we can't apologize our way out of everything. But I just want you to know, if you need anything, if you ever feel unsafe, or if the bond's hurting you, come find me, or any of us. Please. I'm done being the jerk who made you clean up broken dishes. I want to do something right for once." A lump formed in her throat. She forced herself to focus on a scraggly lily pad floating in the water. Her voice emerged rough. "I'm not ready to forgive you." He nodded, face falling just a little. "That's okay. Just stay alive, will you?" She made a non-committal noise and kept her gaze on the pond until she heard him walk away. She exhaled, realizing she was trembling, though not entirely from anger. She felt the bonds pull more acutely each time one of them opened up. She loathed it, even as she yearned for more glimpses into the men behind the alphas. That night, the High Council called an emergency assembly. Aurora was dragged to the main hall once again, surrounded by wolves whose fear permeated the air. A captured rogue had been found wandering near the eastern border. He'd babbled about a Shadow King, a being who was collecting powerful wolves to form an army of darkness. The council believed he might be behind the disappearances. Aurora shivered at the memory of the orchard attackers' glowing red eyes. She pictured a monstrous figure commanding legions of twisted rogues. Her visions no longer felt like mere nightmares. She noticed the triplets exchanging uneasy looks. Even from across the room, she could sense their concern for her. Normally, she'd scoff, but a twinge of guilt twisted her gut. This threat was bigger than their personal feud. so much bigger. The next day, under the council's guidance, the pack launched a sweeping patrol. Aurora was relegated to the estate grounds, heavily guarded. She spent most of her time cleaning or quietly reading, anything to occupy her mind and ignore the ever-growing tension. She tried to keep track of each passing day, counting them down to the fateful 8 months, but the threat overshadowed everything else. Some nights, she considered running. But every time, that orchard attacker's image lurked in her thoughts. Alone out there, she might stand no chance. Another week passed. The air turned crisp with the approach of autumn, leaves in the courtyard beginning to shift colors. Council members left and returned in waves, bringing new reports of skirmishes. The mood turned grim. Aurora overheard multiple conversations about possible evacuation if the threat grew too large. Despite her anger toward the pack, the idea of seeing the estate deserted made her uneasy. Was it possible she cared about the place that had been her prison? At sunset one evening, she got cornered by a young guard who insisted she join the triplets in the war room. She tried to protest, but he was under strict orders. Her nerves jangled as she allowed him to escort her through winding corridors to a fortified chamber rarely used except for battle plans. The room was dimly lit by a single chandelier. Maps and pinned documents covered the long table. Damian stood at the head, Jaxon and Leander on either side, along with 2 members of the council. The tension was thick. She glanced around, feeling out of place. Then Leander gestured for her to come closer. Her wolf stirred, unsettled yet oddly comforted by their presence. One of the counselors, a severe-looking man named Eldrick, cleared his throat. We have reason to believe a major attack will come within days. Our intelligence suggests they've gathered near the western ridge. The problem is we don't know their numbers. Damian's voice was measured. We can't risk sending a small scouting party. They might get picked off. We need a decisive confrontation. Jaxon paced, running a hand through his hair. But these shadows, or whatever they use, give them an advantage at night. We'd need some way to counter that darkness. Aurora felt the weight of their gazes turn to her. Her stomach sank. Did they expect her to have the answers? She might have terrifying visions and weird golden light, but she had zero knowledge of how to harness it reliably. Leander rested his palms on the table, eyes searching her face. You've used your power twice that we know of, once in the library, once in the orchard. Both times, it disrupted that shadow magic. Maybe you're our best shot at neutralizing them. She took a step back, shaking her head. I don't know how. It just happened. Eldrick drummed his fingers on the table. You may be the key to turning the tide. If you could learn to control this energy, you could counter their darkness on the battlefield. Her heart pounded. And what if I can't control it? Last time I tried, I nearly brought the building down. Damian's gaze was unwavering. We'll help you. We'll figure it out together. She wasn't sure which emotion rose stronger, panic at the idea of relying on them, or guilt at how determined they looked to protect her now. She swallowed. This is insane. I'm just an Omega who never even fully shifted. You want me to be your secret weapon? Leander exhaled. We're out of options. She bowed her head, mind reeling. She was torn between bitterness and a duty she never asked for. In the swirling chaos, she remembered the orchard attackers' claws slicing into her skin, that sense of raw evil closing in. Despite everything the triplets had done, she couldn't let the pack be slaughtered by some rising darkness. If innocent wolves' pups, elders, were caught in a war, could she live with herself if she had a chance to stop it? She forced the words past her tight throat. I don't know if I can, but I'll try. The relief in the room was palpable. As the counselors went back to strategizing, the triplets guided Aurora aside to a smaller corner, lowering their voices. Damian looked at her with genuine gratitude. Jaxon gave her a lopsided grin that was more somber than usual, and Leander rested a hand on her uninjured shoulder, a warm pressure that made her heart stutter. She inwardly cursed the bond for making her so aware of them, for stirring her wolf into a conflicted frenzy. Yet part of her recognized a shift. They were treating her like an ally, not a servant. She wasn't sure if that would be enough to erase the pain of the past, but for now, it was a thin rope to cling to while the storm raged. They decided on a crash course in controlling her power. A few council members had books with old legends about lunar conduits, wolves gifted by the moon goddess to channel moonlight into raw energy. Aurora wanted to roll her eyes at how suddenly she'd gone from invisible drudge to prophesied champion. But the crisis demanded action. They set up a safe location for her practice, an empty field near the estate's outskirts, surrounded by a ring of tall torches. Guards watched the perimeter in case any shadowy intruders lurked nearby. The triplets showed up in casual training clothes as if preparing for a spar. She felt a flutter of anxiety as she stepped into the center of the field. Damian spoke gently. Focus on something that triggers your power. When you were in the library, it was rage. In the orchard, it was fear. But you can't rely on losing control each time. She swallowed, remembering the sense of unstoppable force. Jaxon chimed in. Try to breathe. Visualize that gold energy. Pull it up slowly instead of letting it explode. She wanted to snap that she'd never done this before, but she held back. She breathed deep, closed her eyes, and pictured a faint glow growing in her chest. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then a faint warmth spread under her skin. She gasped, cracking an eye open. A tiny spark flickered over her hand, glowing gold like the first ray of sunrise. Leander stepped closer. That's it. Keep it steady. One of the counselors, a severe-looking man named Eldrick, cleared his throat. We have reason to believe a major attack will come within days. Our intelligence suggests they've gathered near the western ridge. The problem is we don't know their numbers. Damian's voice was measured. We can't risk sending a small scouting party. They might get picked off. We need a decisive confrontation. Jaxon paced, running a hand through his hair. But these shadows, or whatever they use, give them an advantage at night. We'd need some way to counter that darkness. Aurora felt the weight of their gazes turn to her. Her stomach sank. Did they expect her to have the answers? She might have terrifying visions and weird golden light, but she had zero knowledge of how to harness it reliably. Leander rested his palms on the table, eyes searching her face. You've used your power twice that we know of, once in the library, once in the orchard. Both times, it disrupted that shadow magic. Maybe you're our best shot at neutralizing them. She took a step back, shaking her head. I don't know how. It just happened. Eldrick drummed his fingers on the table. You may be the key to turning the tide. If you could learn to control this energy, you could counter their darkness on the battlefield. Her heart pounded. And what if I can't control it? Last time I tried, I nearly brought the building down. Damian's gaze was unwavering. We'll help you. We'll figure it out together. She wasn't sure which emotion rose stronger, panic at the idea of relying on them, or guilt at how determined they looked to protect her now. She swallowed. This is insane. I'm just an Omega who never even fully shifted. You want me to be your secret weapon? Leander exhaled. We're out of options. She bowed her head, mind reeling. She was torn between bitterness and a duty she never asked for. In the swirling chaos, she remembered the orchard attackers' claws slicing into her skin, that sense of raw evil closing in. Despite everything the triplets had done, she couldn't let the pack be slaughtered by some rising darkness. If innocent wolves, pups, elders were caught in a war, could she live with herself if she had a chance to stop it? She forced the words past her tight throat. I don't know if I can, but I'll try. The relief in the room was palpable. As the counselors went back to strategizing, the triplets guided Aurora aside to a smaller corner, lowering their voices. Damian looked at her with genuine gratitude. Jaxon gave her a lopsided grin that was more somber than usual, and Leander rested a hand on her uninjured shoulder, a warm pressure that made her heart stutter. She inwardly cursed the bond for making her so aware of them, for stirring her wolf into a conflicted frenzy. Yet part of her recognized a shift. They were treating her like an ally, not a servant. She wasn't sure if that would be enough to erase the pain of the past, but for now, it was a thin rope to cling to while the storm raged. They decided on a crash course in controlling her power. A few council members had books with old legends about lunar conduits, wolves gifted by the moon goddess to channel moonlight into raw energy. Aurora wanted to roll her eyes at how suddenly she'd gone from invisible drudge to prophesied champion. But the crisis demanded action. They set up a safe location for her practice, an empty field near the estate's outskirts, surrounded by a ring of tall torches. Guards watched the perimeter in case any shadowy intruders lurked nearby. The triplets showed up in casual training clothes as if preparing for a spar. She felt a flutter of anxiety as she stepped into the center of the field. Damian spoke gently. Focus on something that triggers your power. When you were in the library, it was rage. In the orchard, it was fear. But you can't rely on losing control each time. She swallowed, remembering the sense of unstoppable force. Jaxon chimed in. Try to breathe. Visualize that gold energy. Pull it up slowly instead of letting it explode. She wanted to snap that she'd never done this before, but she held back. She breathed deep, closed her eyes, and pictured a faint glow growing in her chest. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then a faint warmth spread under her skin. She gasped, cracking an eye open. A tiny spark flickered over her hand, glowing gold like the first ray of sunrise. Leander stepped closer. That's it. Keep it steady. She tried, but doubt bit into her concentration. The glow sputtered. She winced, remembering the library's destruction, her parents' murder, the orchard attacker. A wave of anger and grief rushed in, fueling the warmth into a sudden flare that sparked across her fingertips. She yelped, staggering back. One of the torches fell, flames skittering across the ground. Jaxon lunged to stomp out the scattered embers. She clutched her hands to her chest, breath heaving. The triplets watched her with a mix of concern and pride, as if even that little outburst was progress. Damian surveyed the scorched grass. We'll keep practicing. They did. Night after night, Aurora stood in the torchlit circle, coaxing the power from a quiet whisper to a contained pulse. The triplets offered suggestions, told her stories of other known conduits, mostly from myths. She resisted any temptation to bond with them over this shared goal, because her bitterness still smoldered. But she couldn't entirely shut them out, not when they were so earnest in helping her succeed. As days bled into weeks, the mate bond clawed at her from within. Each time she felt a flicker of closeness to one of them, it was like standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind threatening to shove her over. Some nights, her dreams were calm, filled with half-formed visions of quiet moments in the library or teasing banter over dinner. In those dreams, she was happy with them, safe in their arms. By morning, she always woke up feeling guilty, furious at how easily her heart betrayed her. Still, the threat outside the estate was growing. Patrols found more evidence of shadow wolves. The council predicted an imminent attack, and the pack prepared defenses. The tension escalated day by day, until one morning, the watchtowers sounded the alarm. The horizon boiled with dark shapes swarming over the ridge. Shadowy figures howled in unison, an army blanketing the terrain. Chaos erupted. Warriors scrambled for weapons. The triplets barked orders, dividing squads. Counselors wove protective sigils around the estate's walls. Aurora's heart pounded at the sight. She could sense that familiar creeping dread from her visions, multiplied 1,000-fold. The wave of darkness approached relentlessly, led by a tall figure brandishing twisted shadows like living weapons. She stood on the battlements, her golden power churning in her gut, half of her wishing she could run, the other half knowing it was too late for that. If she didn't stand her ground, the pack might be overrun. She found herself next to the triplets, who had shifted into their wolves, huge forms bristling with tension. They looked back at her, silver eyes blazing, and in that silent moment, she felt a surge of unity that transcended past wrongs. Whether she hated them or not, she couldn't deny they were connected, that they needed each other to survive. The battle commenced. Shadow wolves clashed with moonstone warriors, the courtyard and fields beyond filled with snarls and flashes of steel. Aurora forced herself down from the battlements, diving into the fray to unleash controlled bursts of gold light. Each pulse disrupted the enemy's shadows, forcing them to retreat momentarily. She fought alongside warriors who once sneered at her, who now stared in awe as she blasted back wave after wave of corruption. The triplets tore through the ranks with lethal grace, their wolves moving in perfect synchrony. She saw Jaxon fling a shadow wolf aside, heard Damian's deep growl carry across the yard, glimpsed Leander weaving between enemies with predatory speed. In the chaos, she and the triplets found themselves back to back, an island of fierce defense amid swirling black smoke. She sensed how carefully they shielded her from claws, teeth, darkness. The figure commanding the horde emerged from the gloom. Tall, gaunt, with eyes of molten red, he laughed at the carnage, raising a hand wreathed in swirling tendrils. Aurora felt a jolt of recognition. This was the thing from her dreams. Everything about him screamed twisted power. She aimed her golden light at him, pouring her focus into a single, searing beam. It crashed against his swirling shadows, sparks flying, but he laughed again. The darkness bent, but didn't shatter. He hissed words in that guttural language, flinging a wave of black energy. Aurora barely rolled aside in time, feeling the ground crack beneath her. The triplets lunged to intercept, but the figure coiled shadows around them, snarling curses. She saw them pinned, fighting to break free. Her heart seized. No matter how angry she still was, the thought of them crushed by this monstrosity was unbearable. Fury and love and grief collided in her chest, fueling a burst of power unlike anything she'd conjured before. She roared, allowing all the conflicting emotions to merge. Her arms glowed white-hot with a golden radiance that flooded outward, pushing aside the creeping shadows, tearing them apart like cobwebs. The figure screamed as her energy struck him. Cracks of light appeared across his body. He glared at her with a mixture of hatred and fear, spitting curses that made the air tremble. With a final shriek, he burst into a cloud of smoke. The shadow wolves let out ragged howls, then scattered as though their connection to him had severed. Warriors chased them, dispatching or capturing the ones that didn't vanish. In moments, the courtyard was mostly clear, save for the battered forms of the wounded, the broken debris, and the swirl of dust. The pack had won. Aurora crumpled to her knees, panting, the golden glow fizzling out. The triplets staggered toward her, shifting back to human forms. She looked up, trembling. Leander nearly collapsed at her side, bruised and bleeding, but eyes alight with relief. Jaxon was breathing hard, sporting a nasty slash on his forearm. Damian's lip dripped blood, his chest heaving, but that cold alpha facade was gone, replaced by pure, raw gratitude. She tried to speak, but tears spilled before any words came. The adrenaline, the heartbreak, the horror of that magic still vibrating in the air, all of it overwhelmed her. She realized with a jolt how close she'd come to losing them, how her own fury had transformed into something more protective, more profound. The bond roared in her ears, so strong it was almost painful. Damian crouched, pressing a hand to her cheek. "You saved us all." She choked out a sob, simultaneously wanting to push him away and clutch him close. I had to." Jaxon dropped beside her, ignoring his own wounds. Leander carefully placed a hand on her back, voice rough. "You have no idea how terrified I was that we'd be too late, or that you'd get yourself killed fighting him alone." She swallowed. "I couldn't let you." Her voice failed. She felt the mate bond swirl, forcing her to confront the truth. She did care. Deeply. They helped her stand. Around them, the pack was staggering out, blinking in the aftermath. Council members were shouting instructions for healers and regrouping warriors. Aurora leaned on the triplets, relief and fear tangling. The shadows retreated, but the taste of that cosmic battle lingered in the air. By the time the sun rose the next day, the immediate threat had passed. The wounded were being tended. The estate was littered with broken weapons and scorch marks, but survivors shared shaky smiles of victory. The High Council, thoroughly impressed, declared that the biggest wave of darkness had been shattered. There might be smaller pockets of rogues remaining, but the primary source was gone. Aurora sat in the courtyard, exhaustion pulling at every fiber of her being. The triplets hovered near her, unsure if she wanted them close or not. The truth was, she wanted them and she didn't, all at once. Finally, she sighed and beckoned them closer. Her heart thundered as they approached, a cautious hope in their eyes. She told them in a soft voice that she was grateful they fought beside her, grateful they'd changed enough to become allies rather than tormentors. She admitted she might never forget the pain they caused, but that she recognized they weren't the same cruel boys anymore. She saw how they risked their lives for her and for the pack, and felt something shift inside her, something that had been locked away for a long time. Damian gently took her hand. "We'll spend our lives atoning, if that's what it takes." Jaxon gave a half-laugh. "We're not exactly known for giving up." Leander offered a small, wry smile. "And we still have a lot of growing up to do." She squeezed their hands, the bond humming in warm approval. She remembered the deal with the Moon Priestess. She'd resisted the bond so fiercely, determined to sever it. But in that final battle, she'd chosen them instinctively, risked everything to keep them alive. The vow still hung over her, though. If she truly wanted to break the bond, she could keep resisting for another few months until the 8 full moons were done. The question was, did she still want that? She gazed into each pair of eyes. She didn't have all the answers, and the weight of the past hadn't magically disappeared. But in saving them, she'd also saved a piece of herself. Maybe the bond was more than just a curse. Maybe it was a chance for all of them to rewrite their story. Without fanfare, she whispered that she wasn't going to continue the ritual to sever the bond. Her heart hammered at the admission, tears threatening again. Damian inhaled sharply. Jaxon stilled in shock. Leander's eyes glistened with emotion he rarely showed. None of them broke the moment with words, but she felt their profound relief through the silent connection. She let herself lean against them, the heartbreak in her chest slowly easing into a fragile kind of hope. Around them, the pack began piecing their lives back together, clearing debris, tending the wounded, making sure the realm of darkness had truly retreated. For Aurora, her future was no longer a single-minded mission to escape. She'd found a new goal, forging a pack where cruelty wasn't tolerated, where deaths from the past could be healed, even if the scars would always remain. It wouldn't be easy. The triplets had a lot to prove, and she had a lot of hurt to process. But maybe, just maybe, they could build something better. No one else could dictate how their story should end. She was done letting others decide her fate, done letting fear or anger define her. The Moon Priestess's 8-month challenge had served its purpose, forcing her to confront her pain, her power, and her capacity to choose. And now, she chose to stand with them, to fight for a future she never thought possible. The battered estate glowed under the newborn sun, and Aurora felt the swirling mate bonds settle into something gentler, something that felt like coming home. She stood there, bruised and weary, one hand clasped in Damian's, another in Jaxon's, Leander's steady presence at her back. And for the first time since she was a child, she felt safe, knowing that this time, they were all bound together by more than duty or fear, but by a hard-won unity that might someday become love. They would confront the shadows still lurking beyond the borders, shoulder the burdens left by Argus Thorn, and learn how to forgive, slowly, one day at a time. The road ahead would be rocky, but for now, Aurora closed her eyes, breathed in the scent of morning dew and faint bonfire smoke, and let herself believe in new beginnings. This pack, her pack, would never be the same. Neither would she. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.